Welcome back into the Warehouse Podcast, part of the Believe Podcast Network. My name is Tyler. And folks, we've just got a couple weeks left of Orioles baseball. We've really got to relish it. I'm recording this on Thursday, which is technically the first day of the NFL season. Kind of snuck up on me this year as a Ravens fan. I am excited for it. I'm looking forward to Sunday night against the Bills, but I am going to miss our Baltimore Orioles this year. I was hoping we'd go into October. I love October baseball. It's something that, for most of my life, I couldn't enjoy because the Orioles stunk from the time I was four until the time I was a sophomore in college, basically. So I really love October baseball. We're not going to get Orioles October baseball this year, and that's unfortunate. But I think September can still be an interesting month to talk about some things, to examine some things. That's what we're going to do today with one specific area of the baseball team. Before we do that, just remind you guys that we are part of the Believe Podcast Network. So go to Believe, BLEAV.com to check out our show as well as others. And also, we are on YouTube. We've got 305 subscribers over right now. It's free to just see visuals of the podcast. If you like what you're listening to, you might want to watch it as well. What I do and what some of the other guys have started to do is kind of have like a visual representation on the screen to kind of go through some things. I do a screen share to go through some of the data I'm talking about, some of the sites I'm talking about, some of the stories I'm talking about. So if you guys do like this, I would encourage you to go over to YouTube and subscribe to the show over there. Like I said, totally free and helps us reach other people. And I think the most interesting thing you can do is if you're over there watching this, leave a comment at the bottom of the video about what we're talking about. Maybe you agree with us. Maybe you hate what we're saying. Let us know in a respectful way, and would love to engage with you guys. So check that out, please. But all right. So talking about what we're going to be examining in September, things we care about that maybe aren't, necessarily wins and losses, but they are the things that are going to impact the 2026 Baltimore Orioles, because I think it's fair to say the 2026 Orioles expect to compete. They expect to bounce back from a disappointing season in 2025 and to compete in 2026. And there's a lot of things to like about the Baltimore Orioles, how they're set up right now, but there's also some flaws and there's also some big question marks that I think we need to examine and learn more about in September so that Mike Elias, who I assume will be the GM this offseason, although that's not, confirmed. We've seen Rubenstein with him at a press conference for the Basayo signing. But, obviously Brandon High got fired. This season has been a disappointment. I don't know that it's 100% guaranteed Mike Elias is the GM through this offseason, but it would be kind of odd to allow him to sign a guy to an extension, to be still the public face the way he has been for the last couple months, if you're not expecting him to be the GM going into this offseason. And if that is the case, he's going to need to do a lot of work this offseason to make this team better, to improve this team by probably 20 wins, to make them a playoff team in 2026. And I think one of the areas that's most crucial to this is going to be the Orioles bullpen. So I wrote about this on Camden Chat earlier in the week. I wanted to repurpose that as a podcast episode here and dig a little bit deeper into sort of my thought process and sort of where I got to at the end of writing this. So the Orioles bullpen was an area of relative strength, I think, coming into the year. Felix Bautista was back and healthy to be your closer. You had experience in front of him in the form of Andrew Kittredge, who was signed this past offseason, Sir Anthony Dominguez, Gregory Soto, two guys you had traded for the previous season. You had guys like Keegan Aiken, who was a known commodity, a good, strong lefty, who I think had a really breakout season in 2024, kind of went under the radar, had a good season. Yennier Cano, a former All-Star, you felt good about that. So, if you're talking those, that's what, six guys right there. Most bullpens can't go six deep and you feel pretty good about it. And the Orioles were in that situation where they could. And the bullpen was pretty good early on, started to wobble a little bit. Obviously, the team went sideways. And then at the deadline, the bullpen of all the areas of the team was really picked through. Dominguez traded to the Blue Jays. Soto traded to the Mets. Kittredge traded to the Cubs. And then we find out right after the deadline, Bautista is going to be out for 12 months with a shoulder injury. This coming a year after he has the elbow surgery, more than almost 2 years after that, actually. It's really tough. And now you start to ask questions about Felix Bautista's long-term viability as a Major League Baseball player, not necessarily for 2026, but, you've had an elbow, your velocity down a little bit. You're going to have a shoulder. What's that going to do? And, he's not a 22-year-old. He's, I think, 30, 31 years old. Not a spring chicken. How is he going to bounce back from that? That's a concern for 2026. We know he's out for 12 months. Even if he does come back, what is that going to look like in 2026 in particular? Is he going to feel confident enough to be a reliable late inning arm, let alone be your closer? Is he going to pitch at all? The Orioles have kind of brought him along slowly this year as it was. They weren't pitching him in back-to-back games. They were giving him time off. So I think you don't have a closer going into 2026 is what it sounds like. You also don't have Kittredge, you don't have Soto, you don't have Dominguez. So you've lost, seventh, eighth inning guys. Cano has been a disappointment, especially in the second half of the season, has really kind of fallen apart. Keegan Aiken has stepped up a little bit. He's kind of become the closer for Tony Mansolino. He doesn't exactly fit that role. He doesn't have the type of stuff. He doesn't necessarily have the demeanor, all those sorts of things. But, you know, as the most tenured member of the bullpen, Aiken has stepped up and done an okay job. But it's Aiken right now, and then a bunch of unknowns, including Cano, because Cano has obviously got some higher ceilings than other players in the bullpen, but has been kind of a disaster this year. Has struggled a little bit in 2024 as well. How much can you count on him? I'm not so sure. So that's the bullpen that Mike Elias takes over going into the offseason, where he needs to basically rebuild it from the ground up. He needs to build a reliable, core of relief pitchers that the Orioles can count on going into a season where they really need to compete. And, the rotation has its issues. The rotation's been a lot better the second half of the season. It has things it needs to improve upon. But regardless, they're not going to give you 7, 8 innings every single night. You need a bullpen you can count on. And that is the biggest job ahead for Mike Elias. So what I've done here is I've kind of taken a look at August on, so the start of August, because the trade deadline, July 31st, that's when, Dominguez, Soto, Kittredge all were gone by that point. It felt like a clean breaking point. And I wanted to look at performance from August 1st on. So this doesn't include every single inning that all of these pitchers have thrown for the Orioles, because some of them were up prior to that. But in general, it gives you a good idea of what these players have done in the month plus since the bullpen has gotten a makeover, essentially, or a teardown, really. It hasn't really been made over just yet. We're kind of in the breaking it down phase. We'll build it back up in, November, December, January, things like that. So looking at the pitchers that have thrown in the bullpen since August 1st, the top performer in terms of FWAR, Fangraphs WAR, is Dietrich Enns. This is kind of a surprise for, I think, everybody. I hadn't heard of Dietrich Enns. He's a 34-year-old older pitcher, hasn't really pitched a lot in Major League Baseball, especially prior to this season, was over in foreign leagues for a while, kind of remade himself. And then the Orioles got him, not as part of a trade, because they made that trade with the Tigers. Enns pitched with the Tigers early this year. They made the Morton trade with the Tigers. Enns doesn't come over in that trade. He comes over as, I think, a waiver claim later, right around the trade deadline. But he comes in, sort of felt like a space filler, a reliable enough, like major league-ish quality pitcher that the Orioles can leverage and utilize and feel fairly confident that he can at least like survive out there, and they don't have to shuttle as many young guys back and forth between Norfolk. They can give this 34-year-old guy kind of a chance to sort of sink or swim a little bit and go from there. But Enns has been really good, really reliable. He's thrown 13 and two-thirds innings in the bullpen. That's the second most in the bullpen behind Keegan Aiken since August 1st. 11.85 Ks per nine, 3.29 walks per nine, has a 3.29 ERA and a 2.55 FIP. So all of those kind of tell you he's good. He's striking guys out. He's walking maybe a few too many. 3.29 is a little high, but it's not crazy, especially when you pair it with that K per nine. And he's a reverse splits guy who does really, really well against righties, not so well against lefties, but it allows him to go multiple innings a lot of times. He's appeared in 9 games, pitched 13.2 innings, so he's averaging over an inning per appearance. End's been really, really good. Grant Wolfram, really, really good too. And this is a guy that I think a lot of people are starting to notice as potentially a building block for 2026 in this bullpen. Has a 0.84 ERA, a 1.17 FIP, and a 2.61 xFIP. So yes, his FIP and xFIP are higher than his ERA. He's probably not pitching quite to the level of a 0.84 ERA type of pitcher, but he's pitching pretty darn well. 12.66 Ks per nine, 2.53 walks per nine, and has a 406 batting average on balls in play. So that tells me a couple things on the balls in play. Usually that number's closer to 300, so he's getting a little unlucky, 406. Same with Enns. He's got a 368 batting average on balls in play. Also, though, probably giving up some hard contact when he is giving up contact. That's gonna push your BABIP up quite a bit if you're giving up regular hard contact. So potentially some room for improvement from Wolfram, and explains why his FIP and xFIP are higher than his ERA, because he's got a higher BABIP. He's giving up hard contact. But those numbers of 12.66 Ks per nine, 2.53 walks per nine, I think are really encouraging, and leads you to be excited about him for the future. Rico Garcia, another one that's kind of popping off, especially with his changeup. He had that moment in Boston where he struck out the side with his changeup. has looked really good, striking out almost 10 per nine, walking 1.23 per nine. So good, healthy numbers there. Averaging 95.8 miles per hour on his fastball, which I think is the highest in the bullpen. No, Cade Stroud's is a little bit higher than that, which we'll get to Cade Stroud in just a second. But Garcia has been a standout as well. 3.68 ERA, 3.14 FIP, 2.41 xFIP. So a guy that is probably being a little bit unlucky. His ERA is higher than his FIP and his xFIP. Really solid there. Sean Dubin, a waiver claim from the Astros, has been impressive in a small sample size, only 5 innings, 9 strikeouts per nine, 1.8 walks per nine, only 167 BABIP, so a little bit lucky for him, is yet to allow a run as an Oriole, an earned run anyway. But his FIP is 2.34 and his xFIP is 2.95. So still good numbers. Like I said, that K per nine and walk per nine combination is healthy together. 9 Ks per nine, 1.80 walks per nine. Those are good. BABIP is a little bit low, so he's going to have his FIP and xFIP above. But still, if you had a 2.5 ERA as a bullpen guy, you're feeling pretty good about that. Albert Suarez comes back. Not much to talk about with him yet. I think Suarez is definitely in the conversation for the bullpen as long as he's healthy. I think ideally the Orioles view him as a bullpen piece, either as a really good middle reliever or potentially a swingman type. We won't talk about him too much in terms of performance because he just doesn't have much. He's only made one pitching performance since his return from the injury. Obviously pitched in early March as well. Missed then what is that? 5 months. So he'll factor into it as well. Now we get to more of the negatives, the guys that haven't performed quite as well. Yennier Cano, 11.1 innings since August 1st, is struck out 7.14, which is low, and then has walked 6.35, which is crazy high. And that's really the issue. Cano has never been a big strikeout guy, at least not recently. He focuses more on getting ground balls. And he's a useful guy to come in and with a runner on first, tying run on first, you can get a ground ball, get a double play. He's helpful in that regard. His strikeout numbers are usually not super high, but the walks per nine is just crazy right now. He's just not getting hitters to chase the bottom of the zone, balls that are diving out of the bottom of the zone, which is kind of his bread and butter. And if he can't do that, he's really not effective. And you're seeing that his ERA is only 3.97, but his FIP is 5.08, his xFIP is 5.29. Again, because his BABIP is low at 241, because Cano, when he does get contact, is on the ground. Ground balls are less likely to be hits, and that makes sense. So that makes sense together, but the walks are just really, really a problem. And if the league has figured him out in terms of, don't chase these pitches when they're at a certain point or a certain release point, then that's going to be an issue for him because he's really just not effective with that pitch up in the zone. It's going to get hammered a little bit more often. Ben McDonald was talking about that on the broadcast that, this pitch that works well down in the zone isn't going to work in the middle of the zone because it kind of sinks right into the batter's bat, and that becomes a problem for him. So Cano struggled there. Cade Stroud has been he's a guy that, again, really good ERA. I think he's even got a good ERA on the season. Since August 1st, it's 0.93 is his ERA, but his FIP is 5.83 and his xFIP is 5.44. And that is because he doesn't strike guys out. He's got 3.72 Ks per nine, which is unplayable, honestly. 3.72 Ks per nine. The Orioles aren't trying to win this month, so let's see what he can do. He was added to the 40-man roster last offseason. They clearly like something about him, and he throws hard. He's got the hardest fastball in the bullpen right now. Like I said, averages 96.2 miles per hour, but he's not missing bats at all. 3.72 Ks per nine, 6.52 walks per nine, which is the worst in the bullpen apart from Alex Jackson, who is the Orioles' backup catcher and had to make that one pitching appearance, I think, was that in San Francisco. Cade Stroud's, he's the only one that's been worse than Cade Stroud in terms of issuing walks, which is a problem. Stroud has kind of gotten by because his BABIP is crazy low at 115. Now, that's a combination of probably getting some weak contact, which is a good thing. That's a skill, but also getting a little bit lucky. 115 is crazy, crazy low. Even if he was, good at getting weak contact, you'd still expect that to be like in the low twos, not at 115. So definitely getting some luck there. And that explains why he's got almost a 5-run gap between his ERA and his FIP. Just not ideal right now. Yermín Geraldo is a guy that I think they're trying to make happen. They're trying to make it work. He's got some good characteristics about him, but just isn't performing well right now. Giving up too many home runs, honestly. His issue is the home run ball. 2.7 home runs per nine, not going to work. His ERA is at 7.2 since the 1st of August. Corbin Martin, they just DFA'd for the second time this year. I would expect he's not going to be back, but he's an interesting arm, and you can understand why they keep him around because he's got some electric stuff. He strikes out almost 11 per nine. Walks are an issue for him, and hard contact is an issue for him as well. 2.53 home runs per nine, and his BABIP of 432. And home runs aren't included in BABIP because home runs aren't a ball in play. They're a ball out of play. They are, they don't count there. So he's giving up hard contact that's either going for a home run or staying in play and getting, going through for a base hit. And that ERA of 9.28 is just not going to work. And he's, again, not a young guy. I think he's 29 years old. So just kind of the life of a fringy reliever to kind of get DFA'd and up and down and things like that. And then Keegan Aiken, who's kind of stepped in to be the closer for the team. 7.8 Ks per nine, 3.94 walks per nine. Walks are creeping up there a little bit. 1.69 home runs per nine, which is usually not an issue for Aiken, but he has given up some home runs this month. But a 3.38 ERA against his 5.14 FIP and 4.24 xFIP. I can't get on Aiken too hard because he's getting thrust into a role that he's not used to. He's also throwing a lot of innings, has 16 innings pitched this month, which is kind of a lot. That's basically you're pitching every other day. That's a lot. You're closing. I think we know what Keegan Aiken is. I'm not going to get on his case too much about having a bad month of August when he's just not really comfortable in the role he's in right now. So that kind of gave you the long and the short of it. We've seen some good stuff. Enns, Wolfram, Garcia, Dubin, some bad stuff in Cano, Stroud, Geraldo. Aiken, I put Aiken in the middle there. Martin, who's already been DFA'd. So there are some interesting things there, some building blocks. I think some things to be encouraged by. But I think what I want to do next is talk about, not just the performance, but maybe the structure of the bullpen based on flexibility, skill set, things like that. So we'll do that right after this sponsor read that I have to do. So. Hey, Tyler here from the Warehouse Podcast to tell you about our new sponsor, Delete Me. Delete Me makes it easy, quick, and safe to remove your personal data online at a time when surveillance and data breaches are common enough to make everyone vulnerable. You see, data brokers make a profit off of your data. Your data is a commodity, and anyone on the web can buy your private details. And this can lead to identity theft, phishing attempts, and harassment. But now you can protect your data and your privacy with Delete Me. And the New York Times Wirecutter actually just named Delete Me as their top pick for data removal services. And I know if you're listening to this podcast, you're online a lot, just like I am. And if you haven't had your own data stolen, you may know somebody who has, maybe a family member, a friend. They've been a victim of identity theft, harassment, doxing. It's a common problem. And what Delete Me does is they can help you take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up now for Delete Me. And they now have a special discounted rate for our listeners. And today you can get 20% off your Delete Me plan by texting HIT to 64,000. The only way to get 20% off is to text HIT to 64,000. Message and data rates may apply. Again, that's HIT, H-I-T, to 64,000 for 20% off your Delete Me plan. Thank you, Delete Me, for sponsoring this episode of the Warehouse Podcast. And now, back to the show. All right, so let's get back to sort of the complexion of the bullpen that goes, a step beyond just the performance of it, because, you can scout a box score, you can watch the games, and that's important. But I think we also understand that you don't always have the 26 absolute best players in your organization on your major league roster. It's just not how it can always happen based on, contractual stuff and options and things like that. So something I think that's important to talk about when you talk about the bullpen for the Orioles is Mike Elias most likely wants to get more flexible with his bullpen in 2026. An issue the Orioles had earlier this season was they couldn't really move anybody around. Remember, these were the days when CNL Perez was on the roster, struggling pretty much every time he went out. Then you had a bunch of veterans in Dominguez, Soto, Kittredge that you couldn't send down. Keegan Aiken, you couldn't send him down. Felix Bautista is your closer. You weren't going to send him down. Yennier Cano had options, but is a former All-Star, and I think you expected at a certain point he was going to turn things around. Hasn't exactly happened yet, but you understood the logic there. But the point is, there really wasn't a ton of movable pieces in the bullpen for most of the year. And I think Mike Elias wants to avoid that, at least to a degree, in 2026. Obviously, the priority needs to be building a viable and productive bullpen, but it also needs to be flexible because that's just how you survive a 162 game season. So when you talk about options, I think that needs to be taken into consideration when you're building out a bullpen. So let's talk about the options and who has options, who doesn't for the Orioles right now. And remember, an option gets used once a year. So if you get option five, and I think you can get optioned up to 5 or 6 times, if I remember correctly, within a season, and then you have to be exposed to waivers. But if you get optioned 4 times in a season, that doesn't use 4 options. That uses 1 option for the entire year. So when I talk about the options, I'm going to mention how many options the player has right now. But you likely can subtract like one of those options going into 2026. But importantly, let's talk about the players that are not going to have any options going into 2026 that are currently in the bullpen. That includes Keegan Aiken, Dietrich Enns, Rico Garcia, Albert Suarez, and Sean Dubin. None of them have options remaining. In addition, there's arbitration to be considered about or concerned about. Aiken is going to go through arbitration for the final time. This is his 5th season of service time. So he'll go through arbitration one last time next year. I think he made like $1.4 million this year. He'll likely get a raise from that because you just typically get raises year to year. Yennier Cano will go through arbitration for the very first time. Now, it's his first time. He's a bullpen pitcher. He's not going to get a crazy raise, but he's also been an all-star. So there could be something there where he's going to get, a nice little bump. And that can be a problem for Cano when it comes to sticking with the Orioles because he's going to get a pay bump or he's going to be due a pay bump, and he hasn't been pitching very well. So do the Orioles want to give him a pay bump? We saw last year the Orioles were not interested in giving Danny Coulombe or Jacob Webb any sort of income bump, and they both were released and have subsequently found new teams. Coulombe was really good with the Twins, hasn't been so good with the Rangers. Webb hasn't been that good with the Rangers. But Cano could be kind of headed in that direction. But what could save Cano is that he is part of the group that has options. So Cano has 2 options right now. He will probably have 1 option next year, but regardless, next year he will have an option. Grant Wolfram has 3 options. Cade Stroud has 3 options. Let's take a look in the injuries on the injury front. Felix Bautista has options, but that's not really going to pertain. Scott Blewett is out of options. Colin Selby has 1 option, but he will have used that option this year. So Colin Selby next year will not have any options. If you start thinking about starters, that could, factor into the bullpen. Because, if we've talked about the rotation on here, you assume the rotation is going to be Trevor Rogers, Kyle Bradish, Dean Kramer in the mix somewhere. You hope they go and add somebody this offseason, at least one somebody to the rotation this offseason. Sugano is likely gone after this year, but Rogers, Bradish, Kramer, I think we know will be in the mix. Beyond that, you have to start thinking, will Tyler Wells be a starter next year? Maybe, maybe not. Probably depends on the moves they make. Will Cade Povich be a starter next year? Maybe, maybe not. Depends on the moves they make. Brandon Young, will he be a starter? Probably not, but you never know. So if you talk about those starters that are potentially transitioning to the bullpen, then you're talking about Wells, Povich, Young. All of them will have options next year. It'll be their final option. Well, Wells might have 2 options after this because he will have not been optioned this year, but Povich will be down to 1. Young will be down to 2 options next year. And Grayson Rodriguez, what is the plan with him? Could he factor into the bullpen? If, they're not sure about his arm, if he can't go, 150 innings, maybe he can go 60 innings, every 3 days, a couple innings every 3 days or whatever. Maybe Grayson Rodriguez factors in. He has options as well. And then if we look down in the minor leagues, which I will try to do, the other guys to consider, I think, would be Chase McDermott. He's recently transitioned to a bullpen role, which always kind of made sense there. Carson Ragsdale, they got him from the Giants just this past August. He's got 3 options remaining. He could be in the mix. Jose Espada, Geraldo's down in the minors. He's got options left. And then they've got a ton of guys that are Rule 5 eligible that I think could factor in. Anthony Nunez, who they got in the trade with the Mets. Cameron Foster. They got in the trade with the Mets. Keegan Giles, who's down in AAA, was a 15th round pick of the O's in 2021, has been pretty good this year. He could factor in. Houston Roth, who they had up once, DFA'd. He never pitched for them, is still in the organization though. He could factor in. And that mostly covers the guys that I think are really on the precipice of performing and appearing in the bullpen for the Orioles in 2026. So you get the picture there is a lot going on. There are some things that the Orioles have to consider when it comes to their internal solutions is who's got options, who doesn't. Does that matter? You know, on top of performance. So I think where I end up right now is it's an eight-man bullpen. Right now, I think Wolfram is on the path to making the bullpen in next year. Lefty throws hard. The performance has been good. Keep him around. Beyond that, I don't know. Enns has been really good, but he's out of options. Could he be a swingman type? Can you have or not a swingman, a long man? I don't view him as a starting option really. Albert Suarez maybe more of that. But can you have Suarez and Enns when they kind of fulfill the same role? I don't know. Tyler Wells, I would love to see Tyler Wells in the bullpen. Would the Orioles like him in the rotation? I think he fits better in the bullpen. I think he's shown he breaks down a little bit in the rotation, starts to slow down in the rotation. It just doesn't seem like a fit for him. So I would almost put Wells and Wolfram as like the two bullpen guys that I'm pretty confident about. I feel good about Enns because he's pitched so well, but let's see how September goes. Garcia's similar. I feel good about him, but let's see how September goes. Are you putting those four in the bullpen automatically? I'm not so sure. And it's, I don't have a great answer to this because I think ultimately what needs to happen is anybody that the Orioles feel is interesting, they need to have on the 40-man roster and just hang on to him during the offseason and see how things go. So I think right now, hold on to Enns. He's got his first year of MLB service time. He's not going to be going through arbitration. He'll be cheap. Same Garcia's second year, he'll be cheap. Albert Suarez will be going through arbitration the first time. So do you pay him a little bit more than the league minimum, even though he's been injured? You got to consider that. Dubin, same as Enns and Garcia, is going to be super cheap. So if you think these guys are interesting, hold on to them. But it does become some roster math because are you adding I'm trying to look at the Rule 5 guys. Are you adding Nunez, Foster, and Giles to the 40-man? Do you have enough space for 3 additional bullpen guys? Maybe you do because you're going to non-tender Yennier Cano. You're going to non-tender Keegan Aiken. Like, I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but these are the things you have to consider. And the other factor you have to consider is what are the Orioles doing at closer? Because as far as I'm concerned right now, the Orioles don't have their closer on the roster. You can't go into a 2026 season where you have to win games. You need to be a 90-win team. You need to be going to the playoffs and hopefully making a deep playoff run. I think with the core the Orioles currently have, they can't be wasting another year. I think if they finish with 80 wins and they miss the playoffs, and you're telling me Gunnar Henderson again doesn't get to play in October, nothing for Colton Cowser, nothing for Jordan Westberg, nothing for Jackson Holliday, that feels like a humongous blown opportunity that I'm not so sure Mike Elias is going to survive. And if you want to not guarantee, but give yourself the best chance to get to a postseason, you can't go into a regular season with a grab bag of relievers that you think are going to, who's going to close the ninth inning day after day. Who knows? Who cares? We'll figure it out. That's not viable to me. The Orioles need to go get a closer. Nothing that anybody does in this final month is going to tell me that they are the closer for the 2026 Baltimore Orioles. They need to go make something happen. And there are tons of options for that. So let's look at the free agent options going into this offseason. This is probably not going to be exhaustive. I'll try to cover most of the big options. But Edwin Diaz has an opt-out of $15.5 million with the Mets this year. Probably going to take the opt-out. He's been good this year. You can probably go get a multi-year deal somewhere. His market value, according to SpotTrack, is $17.6 million. So, he might just go right back to the Mets for a big deal, but he'll be out there. Kenley Jansen, a proven guy, hasn't been phenomenal for the Angels this year, but a proven guy, feels kind of in the Craig Kimbrell vein of things, and that might make him unappealing. Ryan Helsley, unrestricted free agent, has not been good with the Mets since coming over in that deal with the Cardinals, but was really good with the Cardinals. Maybe the Orioles feel like he can be a fix, and maybe he'll want to maybe he would take a 1 year deal to kind of rebuild his value if the Mets stuff has kind of tore him down so much because he's been really bad. They're not really using him in high leverage as much. Maybe there's an option there. Robert Suarez with the Padres, we just saw him. Albert Suarez's brother has an opt out of $8 million this year. He's 34. Might want to go get a big bite at the apple. He can make more than $8 million as a lockdown closer, and the Padres have a lot of guys to pay in that bullpen. So will Suarez be the guy? I don't know, but I think he'll probably opt out. So that's an option. Let's look unrestricted free agents. Emilio Pagan with the Reds, Luke Weaver with the Yankees isn't really their closer, but is kind of their closer. You know, they got Bednar now, so he's probably not going to come back. Tyler Rogers with the Mets has been better than Helsley. Let's see who else we got. Sir Anthony Dominguez could be a guy. The Orioles kind of raved about him out the door, and I've heard that they really love him. So I could see maybe a return there. He's been okay with the Blue Jays. Andrew Kittredge has a club option for 9 mil. The Orioles, I don't think, wanted to pick that up, and that's why they traded him. So I doubt he would be the answer. Let's see. Kyle Finnegan with the Tigers, Raisel Iglesias with the Braves, Soto with the Mets. So I'm kind of just sorting by like value, market value of these pitchers. Devin Williams is an interesting one. Really has struggled with the Yankees this year, but was phenomenal with the Brewers prior to that. Maybe there's something there the Orioles take a flyer on. But again, how confident are you feeling in that going into next season with a guy like Devin Williams, who, yes, has a track record, but ultimately is a relief pitcher and has really struggled recently. And I think sometimes with relief pitchers, it's sort of like, what have you done for me lately? If you're broken, I don't want to buy you right now. So maybe if it's something cheap, but how confident do you feel in that? I'm not so sure. I think regardless, they probably go on the short term side of things with a reliever. I don't see Mike Elias splashing the cash too much on a reliever, but he, what was Kimbrel's deal, like $12 million, $13 million a couple years ago? I could see him doing that. There's no such thing as a bad 1 year deal. And forever, all the crap people give about Kimbrel, he was really good through July. After July, he broke, and that was unfortunate. And not what the Orioles needed last year, but it wasn't a totally terrible, disastrous move like I think some people want to kind of look back on history and make it seem like. But I think regardless, they need to do something. Maybe there's a trade that can be had. I don't know who all is out there now in the trade market and who's good as a reliever kind of changes month to month, but maybe there's something there. Again, that doesn't feel very Elias-y to give up assets for a relief pitcher, even if it is a closer. I see him much more comfortable just giving cash to somebody. And they took some cash off their books the second half of the season by getting rid of some of these relievers, getting rid of Laureano and Kittredge, who had contracts for next year. That maybe saves some money there. So I think there should be some leeway there to add a bullpen piece and to likely add at least one starter. So I don't think it's asking too much for him to do that. What's less clear is what they're going to do in the middle innings. I'm not so sure Elias seems like the type of guy to be like, yeah, let's give our eighth inning guy $7 million. So, is he going to get a closer and a Luke Weaver type? Or a closer and get back into like the Sir Anthony Dominguez or Gregory Soto type of stuff. An interesting but flawed middle relief pitcher that's going to make $8 million. I don't know about that. I feel like that's what August and September are for now, is to see if the Orioles can figure out something in the middle innings to feel confident about, and that's where the guys like Garcia and Dubin and even Aiken need to prove like, hey, you're out of options. You give us less flexibility. Are you worth keeping around to make this more of a headache for me? We'll see about that, because I think ultimately Elias probably wants 2, maybe 3 spots in the bullpen that are optionable. That is probably going to be Wolfram, probably Stroud. I think they like what Stroud offers them. Those feel like the 2 guys that are currently in the pole position. I think Chase McDermott has a chance to be a dude in the spring that really impresses. And then obviously there's a bunch of Rule 5 guys, Nunez, Foster, Gillis, who I think, they're going to get added to the 40-man, I would imagine. I'm not sure why they would trade for Nunez and Foster if they didn't plan on putting them on the 40-man. And Gillis, who was, I think, Rule 5 eligible last year, probably gets added this year because I think somebody would take him. Maybe there's an opportunity there for one of those guys to lock on as well. But I think it's probably 2 to 3 spots are going to be optionable spots. There's going to be a closer that they sign, and that gives you what, four more spots in the bullpen to be fought out between the likes of Enns, Garcia, Suarez, Dubin, uh, Blewett if they keep him, Selby, any of the rotation guys that don't make the rotation, like Young, Povich, Wells. I think Wells fits in the bullpen really well, and he's also optionable. So I would kind of love that. And that still gives you four spots. Garcia's changeup feels like a weapon. Ends right now feels like a weapon, being a lefty that can face righties. Um, and Wolfram, if he can be like that dude that can just, pick apart lefties and throws really hard, then that starts to feel like a decent bullpen to me. And again, every team is looking for pitching. Every team is looking for bullpen pitching, especially because nobody ever has enough of it. It's never perfect. Even the good teams have bad bullpens a lot of times, and the Orioles are no different there. So I don't expect this to be a finished product. I think the Orioles want to feel pretty confident about who they're throwing in the ninth inning, eighth inning, and seventh inning, and everything else is kind of a crapshoot. So to predict it like right now, like this is who the bullpen's going to be, is probably a fool's errand. But I think at the very least, we can kind of lay the groundwork for what to expect and what matters in August and September. And I think performance does matter, optionability matters, cost matters. And we've kind of explained all those things today. So let me know what you think in the comments of this episode, either on YouTube, on Spotify, or on social media at The Warehouse Pod on Blue Sky. You can also email us, thewarehousepod@gmail.com. Give us your thoughts. Is there anybody you like right now that you think is going to be in the bullpen next year on the team right now? Is there anybody you think needs to get going? And is there any maybe free agent or trade target you would have for the ninth inning? Let us know in all those channels I mentioned, and get involved. We'll try to reply to as many as we can. But that's all I've got for this episode. We've just got a few weeks left with these guys. It's depressing. Yeah, we're looking forward to football, but kind of bummed out the Orioles season is over, because even though they stink, they're still our guys, and we're still sickos, and we still love watching it, because what else are you going to do in the middle of the summer? You're going to watch Orioles baseball and be miserable and throw stuff at the TV, because that's also kind of fun and weird and part of the human experience. So, yeah, that's all I've got. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. Subscribe to the show if you haven't already. And yeah, we'll talk to you soon. See you.